It was a rainy night, the kind of night when the streets looked empty and the streetlights cast long, wet shadows. General Marcus Ellison was driving home after a long day at a military conference. He wasn't in his full uniform tonight, just a dark jacket and plain trousers. He wanted to be comfortable after hours of meetings and speeches. The sound of the rain against his car roof was steady and soft, a welcome break from the noise of the city. His thoughts were on his warm home, a cup of tea, and a good night's rest. The conference had been intense, and as a 4-star general, he carried the weight of decisions that could affect thousands of lives. His mind wandered to the soldiers he had met earlier, young men and women who looked at him with respect and hope. That thought brought him a small smile. He was proud to serve, proud to lead, proud to protect. Then, in his rearview mirror, he saw them flashing red and blue lights cutting through the darkness and rain. At first, he thought maybe they were going somewhere urgent. He slowed down and moved slightly to the side, expecting the police car to pass. But it didn't. Instead, it stayed behind him, lights still flashing. Marcus frowned. He had done nothing wrong. He wasn't speeding. His headlights were on. His seatbelt was fastened. Still, he signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. The wet tires hissed against the pavement as he stopped. The police car came to a halt right behind him, its lights still bright and sharp in the rainy night. He took a slow breath. Years of military training had taught him to remain calm in tense situations. Even so, there was a knot forming in his stomach. He reached over, turned off the engine, and kept both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. 2 officers stepped out of the police car. Their movements were quick, their faces hard. They didn't walk casually. They walked like men already convinced they were dealing with trouble. Marcus stayed still, waiting for them to speak first. The first officer came to the driver's side. He was tall, with a sharp jawline and eyes that didn't seem to blink much. The other officer stood slightly behind, near the back door of Marcus's car, one hand resting close to his holster. The rain was falling harder now. Drops sliding off their caps and jackets. License and registration? The first officer said. His tone wasn't polite. It wasn't just neutral either. There was something in it, a coldness, a lack of respect. Marcus nodded slowly. "Of course, officer," he replied. His voice was calm. He reached for his wallet in plain sight, moving slowly so there was no misunderstanding. He handed over his license and then the registration from the glove compartment. The officer glanced at them, but his expression didn't change. He didn't say why Marcus had been stopped. He didn't mention any traffic violation. Instead, he looked Marcus up and down, as though trying to find something wrong with him. Marcus decided to ask, "Is there a problem, officer?" His tone was respectful, but firm. "Just making sure everything's in order." The officer said, not really answering. His partner walked a few steps closer, his eyes scanning the inside of the car. Marcus thought about telling them right then who he was, a 4-star general in the United States Army. A man who had served his country for decades, but something in their faces told him it wouldn't matter. They weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for a reason. The officer handed back the registration, but kept the license in his hand. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Marcus felt the cold air rush in when he opened the door. Rain hit his jacket immediately. He stepped out slowly, keeping his hands where they could see them. The wet pavement reflected the flashing lights, making the whole scene feel like it was under some cruel spotlight. "Put your hands on the hood," the second officer said sharply. Marcus hesitated. "May I ask why hands on the hood?" The officer barked again, louder this time. Marcus did as told, feeling the cold metal under his palms. The rainwater ran down the hood and under his hands. His breath made small clouds in the air. His mind was racing, but he kept his voice steady. "Officers, I am a serving 4-star general in the U.S. Army," he said. His voice was neither arrogant nor pleading. It was a simple statement of fact. The first officer let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Yeah? And I'm the president," he said. The second officer gave a small smirk but said nothing. Marcus felt the sting of their words, not because they doubted him, he was used to proving himself, but because of the disrespect in their tone. It wasn't curiosity, it wasn't procedure. It was prejudice, plain and sharp, as the rain fell harder. Marcus caught sight of movement out of the corner of his eye. A couple of people had stopped on the sidewalk nearby. Watching, one of them held up a phone, recording. The glowing screen was like a quiet witness in the dark, the first officer told him to spread his legs and began patting him down. The search was rough, unnecessary. The man's hands pushed against his shoulders and back with force. Marcus didn't move, didn't argue. Years of combat had taught him that sometimes survival meant patience. Inside, though, his pride burned. Here he was, a man who had led soldiers into battle, who had faced real enemies in foreign lands, standing in the rain like a suspect in his own country, his service ribbons, his medals, his years of sacrifice. None of it mattered to these men in this moment. The pat-down ended. But the cold feeling in Marcus's chest didn't. The first officer stepped back and looked at his partner. They didn't say anything, but Marcus knew they had already decided how this was going to go. The rain kept pouring as Marcus stood beside his car, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement. The first officer still had his license in hand, turning it over as if searching for a reason not to believe it was real. His partner kept one hand resting near his holster, his eyes locked on Marcus's every move. Marcus stayed still, the cold seeping through his jacket. He spoke again, his voice calm but steady, telling them his name, rank, and position in the United States Army. He had been in situations far more dangerous than this, tense negotiations. In war zones, enemy fire just meters away. Yet somehow, standing here on a rainy American street, he felt a different kind of danger. This one wasn't about bullets or bombs. It was about perception, about the way these men looked at him, and saw not a leader, but a suspect. The first officer raised an eyebrow. 4-star general, huh? And what's a general doing driving around here at night? His tone wasn't curiosity. It was disbelief mixed with mockery. Marcus explained that he had just left a military conference and was heading home, but his words seemed to slide off them. They weren't listening, or maybe they didn't want to. The second officer stepped closer, his boots splashing in shallow puddles, and told Marcus to turn around. Marcus followed the order, his movements deliberate. He didn't want to give them even a shadow of an excuse. "Let's see what we've got here," the first officer muttered as he reached for Marcus's wallet. He inspected the military ID inside, then shook his head with a smirk. "You can buy these online," he said casually, handing it back like it meant nothing. The comment hit harder than it should have. Marcus had earned that ID through decades of service, through endless days in the heat and cold, through decisions that weighed on him for years. Now, here it was, treated like a fake souvenir. More people had started gathering at a distance, their umbrellas bobbing in the rain. A few had their phones out, recording. The glow of the screens caught the corner of Marcus's eye. He wondered if those videos would show the truth or if they would only catch pieces, enough to twist the story in any direction. The officers began questioning him, but not about anything relevant to driving. They asked where he was from, why he was here, who he was meeting. Each question was laced with suspicion, as if his very existence on this road needed justification. Marcus answered every one, his tone measured, but inside, frustration built with every second. Finally, the first officer said, "Hands behind your back." Marcus looked at him, the rain dripping from his hairline down his face. "On what charge?" he asked. The officer's jaw tightened. "We'll figure that out at the station," he replied, The cold bite of the handcuffs snapped around his wrists. Marcus didn't resist. He knew resistance would only escalate the situation. The metal dug into his skin, sending a dull ache up his arms. The second officer gripped his elbow and pushed him toward the patrol car. The wet ground made the soles of his shoes slip slightly, but the officer's grip was firm, almost punishing, as they walked. Marcus caught the sound of someone in the crowd saying, "Isn't that the general?" The words were quiet, almost lost in the rain, but they gave Marcus a strange mix of hope and sadness. Hope that maybe someone would speak up. Sadness that it even had to come to this. The back door of the patrol car opened with a metallic click. The inside smelled faintly of old vinyl and damp air. They pushed him in without ceremony, his shoulder brushing against the frame. The door slammed shut, cutting off the noise of the rain for a moment. In that small enclosed space, Marcus could hear his own breathing. Slow and steady, he focused on it, the way he did during missions when staying calm was the only way to survive. Through the rain-speckled window, he could still see the flashing lights, the blurred figures of the officers, and the crowd beyond, somewhere deep inside. He knew this night would not end here. The truth had a way of coming out, but until then, he would endure, as he always had. The patrol car began to move, its tires hissing over the rain-soaked streets. Marcus sat in the back, his hands cuffed tightly behind him. The metal biting into his wrists every time the car hit a bump. He kept his gaze fixed on the blurred shapes. Outside the window, streetlights, storefronts, the occasional pedestrian under an umbrella, all passing in silence, except for the hum of the engine and the crackle of the police radio. He didn't speak. The two officers in the front were talking quietly to each other, but their words were low and muffled. Every now and then, one of them would glance at him in the rearview mirror, not with curiosity, but with that same suspicion, as if trying to confirm that their prisoner still looked like the problem they thought he was. Marcus could feel the dampness of his jacket from the rain. The cold seeping in, he sat upright, shoulders squared, not giving them the satisfaction of seeing him slouch or look defeated. Years of military discipline had trained him to maintain composure even in hostile territory. This wasn't the battlefield, but it felt just as tense. Only the enemies weren't foreign soldiers. They were supposed to be the people sworn to protect. When they reached the station, the car rolled into a dimly lit parking area at the back. The doors opened, and one officer yanked him out with more force than necessary. The rain was lighter now, just a fine mist, but the air was cold enough to sting. The officer kept a firm grip on Marcus's arm as they led him inside. The booking area smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. A desk sergeant sat behind a counter, flipping through paperwork. He looked up as they approached. His eyes landed on Marcus, then on the cuffs. "What's the charge?" he asked. The first officer shrugged. "Suspicious behavior, possible fake ID," he said. Tossing Marcus's license onto the desk, the sergeant picked it up and examined it briefly. His face giving nothing away, Marcus spoke for the first time since leaving the roadside, his voice calm but carrying weight. "Sergeant, my name is General Marcus Ellison. United States Army, 4-star rank. That ID is not fake." The sergeant raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Instead, he nodded toward a small holding area. "We'll process him first." They took his fingerprints, the black ink smudging against his skin. They made him stand in front of a camera for a mugshot, the flash momentarily blinding him. Every step of the process felt surreal. He had been photographed many times in his life. Ceremonies, official portraits, meetings with presidents and generals, but never like this. Never with the unspoken label of criminal hanging in the air. Through it all, Marcus didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He simply watched, memorizing every detail, every face, every unnecessary shove or sharp tone. Finally, they led him toward the holding cell. The door clanged open, and he stepped inside. The metal bench was cold under him as he sat down. The room was silent, except for the distant sound of ringing phones and muffled conversations from the other side of the bars. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. This was not how he imagined ending his night, but he had faced worse. And he had one advantage they didn't know about: a single phone call. The kind of call that could change the entire situation in minutes. He opened his eyes again, the faintest trace of a plan forming in his mind. The officers thought they were in control, but they had no idea who they had just put in that cell. Marcus sat in the cell, the cold metal bench pressing against his back. The sound of dripping water echoing somewhere down the hall. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, casting a harsh, sterile glow over the gray walls. He kept his head high, eyes calm. Even though every part of him wanted to demand justice, he knew better. Anger here was fuel for them. Calmness was his weapon. After a few minutes, the desk sergeant appeared outside the bars, holding a clipboard. "You get one phone call," he said, sliding the cell door open just enough to let Marcus out. His wrists were still cuffed. My metal was beginning to leave deep marks on his skin. They led him to a desk phone on the far side of the room. The sergeant stood nearby, watching closely. Marcus didn't bother with small talk. He lifted the receiver, dialed a number from memory, and waited. The line clicked after only 2 rings. "This is General Ellison," he said in a low, firm voice. "I need to speak with the office of the chairman, priority 1. The sergeant's expression shifted slightly. Not in understanding, but in suspicion. Marcus kept speaking. His words clipped and precise. "Yes, confirm my identity through Defense Command. I am currently detained at the Fairview Police Station under false pretenses. I need immediate verification." Sent to this facility, the silence on the other end lasted only seconds before a crisp voice replied, "Understood, sir. We're on it." Marcus hung up without another word. The entire exchange had taken less than a minute. The sergeant tried to mask his curiosity with a frown. "That your lawyer?" he asked. Marcus met his eyes, his tone still calm. "No, Sergeant. That was the Pentagon." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. The sergeant glanced toward the 2 arresting officers who had stopped their quiet conversation to listen. A strange tension filled the room. Like the moment before a storm breaks, 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then the desk phone on the sergeant's counter rang. He picked it up, his voice professional at first, but within seconds, his posture changed, his face stiffened, his free hand moving to straighten his uniform. "Yes, sir. Understood." "Yes." Immediately, when he hung up, his eyes darted toward Marcus. The arrogance from earlier was gone, replaced by something almost like fear. "Unlock the cuffs," he ordered to the nearest officer. The officer hesitated, his mouth tightening. "Sir, now," the sergeant snapped. The key turned in the cuffs, and the metal finally released its grip on Marcus's wrists. He rubbed them slowly, the deep indentations still fresh on his skin. The sergeant cleared his throat. "General Ellison, we were unaware of your position. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Marcus didn't respond right away. He simply stood, adjusting his jacket. His silence said more than any sharp reply could have. The 2 officers who had arrested him were avoiding eye contact entirely. The sergeant gestured toward the door. "You're free to go, sir." Marcus walked past them without looking back. Each step measured, controlled. The air outside felt fresher, cleaner. But the weight of the night still sat heavy on his shoulders. He had been in battlefields where life and death decisions came in seconds. But this was a different kind of fight, one that didn't end when you left the station. The cool night air hit Marcus as he stepped out of the station. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle. The wet pavement glistened under the streetlights. But the moment his boots touched the concrete steps, he saw them, a crowd of people. Gathered just beyond the yellow curb, their faces turned toward him. Some curious, some tense. A few of them raised their phones higher. Recording every second, word had clearly spread. A couple of news vans were parked along the street. There, satellite dishes pointed skyward. A camera light flicked on. Casting a bright glare across Marcus's face, he stopped at the edge of the steps. Not because he was afraid, but because he needed a moment to read the scene. "General Ellison," someone called from the crowd. The voice was urgent. "It's true you were arrested." Another voice followed. "Was it racial profiling?" Microphones began pushing forward. Hands stretching over the heads of others to get closer. Marcus didn't rush to answer. He stood tall, his posture straight. His eyes calm but unreadable. The officers at the entrance of the station lingered. Just behind him, their expressions tight. Marcus could feel the weight of their stares, as if they were hoping he would simply walk away without saying a word. A woman from the press stepped closer. Her raincoat hood pulled tight. "Sir, people are saying the Pentagon called the station directly. Can you confirm that?" Marcus looked at her, his face steady. "I made one phone call," he said slowly. "And the right people answered." His voice carried a tone that was both factual and final. Leaving no space for argument, the crowd murmured, some impressed, others still in shock. Among them, Marcus noticed a man in an old army field jacket standing quietly. The man gave a small nod of respect. Marcus returned it with the faintest tilt of his head. Another reporter pushed forward. "General, do you believe the officers targeted you because of your race?" The question hung heavy in the air. Marcus took a long breath. The easy path would be to explode in anger, to lash out. But years of command had taught him the value of timing, of words that land like carefully aimed shots. "I believe," he said finally, his voice calm but carrying through the rain, "that sometimes the battles we fight aren't overseas. Sometimes they're here, in our own streets. And I also believe the truth will always reveal itself." There was silence for a moment, except for the soft hiss of tires on the wet road. Then the questions started flying again, but Marcus didn't answer. He turned and began walking toward his car, which was still parked a few blocks away. The crowd followed at a distance, the cameras still rolling. As he walked, he thought about how quickly the night had turned from a simple drive home to something far more significant. He hadn't planned to become the center of a public storm, but the events were no longer just about him. They were about every soldier, every citizen, who had been judged by appearance before truth. When he reached his car, he paused for a moment. Resting one hand on the roof, the water droplets slid across the metal under his palm. The flashing lights from the station were still faintly visible in the distance, but he didn't look back. He opened the door, stepped inside, and started. The engine? The low rumble of it felt grounding as he pulled away. The thought settled in his mind like a mission order. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Pentagon might have gotten him out tonight, but the real fight was just beginning. If you want, I can move directly into Part 6, where the political and military fallout begins to unfold. By morning, the story was already everywhere. The arrest of a 4-star general, a decorated black officer with decades of service, had exploded across news channels and social media. Clips from bystanders' phones were playing on repeat, showing Marcus being handcuffed in the rain, standing silently while officers shoved him toward the patrol car. Hashtags with his name were trending worldwide in Washington. The situation was moving faster than even Marcus expected. Inside the Pentagon, meetings began before sunrise. Senior officials spoke in low, tense voices. Some were furious, others cautious, but all agreed this could not be ignored. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff personally reached out to Marcus. his voice heavy with concern. "We'll handle this at the highest level, General. But I'd like you to prepare a statement." Marcus sat at his kitchen table, still in the plain clothes he had worn the night before. The coffee in front of him had gone cold, but he hadn't touched it. His phone buzzed constantly, messages from fellow officers, old friends, and even soldiers he had once commanded. Some wrote words of outrage, others words of pride for how he had handled himself. Meanwhile, in the Fairview Police Department, the atmosphere was shifting from arrogance to panic. The two officers who had arrested Marcus were called into a closed door. Meeting with Internal Affairs, their commanding officer demanded a detailed explanation. Their answers were shaky, inconsistent, and every lie they tried to stitch together unraveled under the weight of the video evidence. In the town, people who had witnessed the arrest were speaking to reporters. One man described Marcus's calm as the kind of presence you only see in someone who's seen real combat. Another woman admitted she hadn't known who he was at the time, but felt in my gut it wasn't right. Marcus avoided the cameras for now, choosing silence over a rushed statement. He knew the world expected him to explode in anger, to shout, to condemn, but he also knew that measured words could cut deeper than rage. Timing mattered, and right now, the nation's attention was fixed on him that evening. A call came from a high-ranking senator who had served in the military years ago. "Marcus, this is more than your story now," he said. "This is about how people in uniform, especially people of color, are treated when the uniform comes off. I want you to testify before Congress. We need this on the record." Marcus listened quietly, his mind already calculating the risks. The spotlight could be dangerous, but turning away from it now would mean letting the moment pass without change. And for him, the mission had always been about more than just himself. That night, as he stood by his living room window, watching the rain return in soft sheets against the glass, Marcus knew the next step wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about forcing the country to look at an uncomfortable truth and refusing to let them look away. The hearing room was packed. Rows of wooden chairs filled with reporters, aides, and curious onlookers. Cameras clicked rapidly as Marcus entered, wearing his full dress uniform. The medals on his chest caught the light, each one representing years of service, sacrifice, and leadership. He walked with steady, measured steps, the same way he had walked into combat zones, only now the battlefield was political. At the front, members of Congress sat behind long desks, papers spread before them. Some leaned forward, ready to listen. Others sat back with guarded expressions. The room quieted as Marcus took his seat. A clerk swore him in, and then the questions began. One congresswoman leaned toward her microphone. "General Ellison, could you describe, in your own words, what happened on the night of your arrest?" Marcus took a slow breath, his voice deep and even. "I was driving home from a military conference when I was pulled over without cause. I complied with every order given to me. I identified myself clearly. I provided both my driver's license and military identification. Despite this, I was treated as a threat, handcuffed, and placed in the back of a patrol car." The room was silent. His words carrying the weight of truth, he continued. "This was not the first time I've faced hostility, but it was the first time it happened on the streets I swore to defend. And I will say this, the uniform does not protect you from farm lies. Well-notely ruby kiss has the luxurious texture that glides on. My lies, lie lost, lie lies, lie lies, lie lie lies, lie lies, slash a lies. But with slash bally balabad, my lies, my lies. My lies a lies, my lies. My lies, lie lies. My lies, by lies. Ik en may by lies. I be mups. Lies. With so sick and noted allies, it be my me bagayet up sub white I sai kai sukrit kisai salai sticket to siklai I to we I it's it to ba besk let be kit to sit dist best to the secret it's prejudice when the person looking at you has already decided who you are. Murmurs swept through the audience. The congresswoman nodded slowly. General, do you believe this was an isolated incident? Marcus's gaze moved across the room. No, ma'am. I believe it is part of a pattern experienced by countless citizens who never get the chance to sit where I am now. I have the rank, the connections, and the platform to speak about it. Many do not. The hearing stretched on for hours, each question probing deeper. Marcus answered every one without raising his voice, choosing precision over emotion. He spoke not only about his arrest, but about the broader issues, training failures, systemic bias, the danger of unchecked authority. By the end, even some who had entered the room skeptical were leaning forward, listening with the seriousness the subject demanded. When the session adjourned, reporters swarmed him, microphones thrust toward his face. He stopped just long enough to say, "This is not about me alone. This is about a country that must live up to the values it claims to hold." Then he walked past them, his shoulders squared. That night, the footage of his testimony aired on every major network. Clips spread online, shared by people across political and social lines, in living rooms, offices, and coffee shops. Strangers found themselves talking about what he had said, not because it was loud or angry, but because it was unshakably clear. Weeks passed, but the ripples from that night never faded. The hearings had sparked something bigger than Marcus expected across the country. People were sharing their own stories. Veterans wrote letters to newspapers describing similar encounters. When they were out of uniform, community leaders demanded changes to local policing policies. Some police departments, under growing public pressure, began reviewing training programs for Marcus. The attention was both a burden and a responsibility. He had gone back to his duties, leading operations and mentoring younger officers. But everywhere he went, someone would stop him, shake his hand, and say, "Thank you for speaking up." Some were soldiers, some were civilians. Some were parents who simply wanted their children to live without fear. The Fairview Police Department eventually announced the suspension of the 2 officers who had arrested him. Internal Affairs confirmed multiple policy violations. The chief of police made a public statement calling the incident a serious failure in judgment, though it wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement, a rare one. One evening, Marcus stood on the stage of a military academy, addressing a room full of cadets. He spoke not about battles overseas, but about integrity. "Your rank, your medals, your uniform, these are symbols," he said. "But the true measure of a soldier, or a citizen, is how you act when no one is watching, and sometimes the fight is not on foreign soil, but here at home, where the enemies are ignorance and prejudice." After the ceremony, a young cadet approached him, hesitant at first. "Sir," she said quietly, "I'm the daughter of a police officer. I just want you to know I'm going to do better." Marcus smiled faintly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "That's all I can ask," he said. Months later, walking down a quiet street, Marcus passed the spot where it had all begun. The rain that night had been heavy, but now the road was dry. The street lights cast a warm glow over the pavement. He paused for a moment, remembering the flashing lights, the cold cuffs, the disbelief in their voices. Then he looked ahead. The sound of his steady footsteps carrying him forward. He knew change would be slow, maybe painfully slow. But he also knew he had lit a fire that would keep burning, and, in his heart, he carried the same resolve he had on every mission to see it through, no matter how long it took.